again, Charlotte here. Right, I just want to show you some quick palette knife cloud effects that you can get onto wet paint. And this is such a great way to get really interesting techniques, really interesting effects, I should say, using a really interesting technique. Now, if you haven't used a palette knife before, there's a little video which I've done which can help you understand the different pressures that you need to use with the tool. And I've also got a list on accompanying this YouTube video which shows exactly which palette knife shape and size I've used. I'm going for the little diamond shaped one. This is kind of a middle size tool, which I find can be used for so many different situations. All right, so I've got my nice blended sky that I demonstrated earlier, and what I'm doing is on my palette here, I'm going to just take pure white and picking up lots of nice thick pure white onto the palette knife, and I'm going to start on the right hand side up in the pink area and just start delicately just blending in some lovely light white cloud shapes. You know, those little sort of fluffy clouds that you get sort of scudding across the sky, and I'm pressing a little bit harder, get some smooth blends coming through. Now, I always encourage my students to sometimes just push the painting a little bit further than you think you want to go, because you never know what magic you're going to discover. And of course, as I'm using the palette knife, it's picking up some of the paint from underneath, which is still wet, and then I can apply it back over the top. So you just start getting gorgeous sweeps of shape and different colours. See those little bits of orangey peach coming through on top of those clouds? Sometimes this is going to happen. You're going to dig the palette knife in a little bit too hard, or it's going to create too much suction. And in that case, just get a little bit more paint and go over the top. And remember, acrylics are amazing to use because you can just paint over anything that you don't like. You just need to wait for it to dry. Now, here we have just a lovely sort of smooth blend and just gorgeous. But if you want to add in a little bit more colour, so maybe I take some pure red, and I know that this is going to look quite bright and shocking when I first start with it. But if I add a little bit more white over the top, I can start getting some pink tones. And I'm starting up in this corner, partly because I find it really comfortable bringing the palette knife towards me, and also just to get a little bit of movement and shape throughout the picture, thinking ahead to what I might be doing with it. Now, of course, you can experiment with all kinds of layers, and when this is dry, adding more white over the top so it's not going to mix in, and just allowing yourself to explore some of those shapes, because you can get all kinds of cloud formations, and this is really can allow you to experiment and just put whatever you want onto there. Okay, now see, I love the little holes that start to develop between the palette knife layers, and as you can see, I'm doing it wet, so I'm constantly aware of the mix of paints that's happening. And if you get a line there where I've just dug the heel of the tool in and it's just taken off a little bit of the paint, never worry about it. Just cover it up with a little bit more paint, and I'm just smoothing it gently there, so I'm mixing in with the palette knife, just getting some different blends. Nothing is ever a problem in acrylic. It's just such a wonderful medium to use. Now, that's created a lot of sort of action in the sky, and I could of course have stopped after just the first little cloud, and you might want to do that. You might just want to have a tiny little bit of something going on in your sky, but I always say just, you know, take it a little bit further. You might just discover some magic that you weren't expecting. All right, so I'm also going to demonstrate with the blue sky that we did in our blending exercise, and just see how different that's going to look. Now, as this dries, of course, the acrylic is going to get slightly darker, but I'm still going to have all of that lovely sort of movement over here and this nice calm space of pink up at the top. and all of the different ways that the palette knife has layered the paint is making for just beautiful effects. I always say if you want to take a spoon to your painting and eat it, then you're under a winner. But obviously don't do that, it's not going to be particularly good for you. But when it's that yummy using the palette knife, it's such a wonderful, wonderful way to get really quick effects. So just going to do a quick swap over. Okay, now I forgot to bring my rag. Need to give the palette knife a quick clean. Not sure that I want to get some peachy clouds in on this sky. Let's start with the pure white to begin with. And when you're using a palette knife, you just need a rag or a paper towel just to wipe off the knife, make sure it's nice and clean. Now to get some fresh white. This is one of the reasons why I always encourage more bulk buying of the white paints in a cheaper variety. And then you don't need to hold back at all when you want to try out some new effects. So again, I'm getting just pure white off my palette here, fresh pile. And I'm going to start from the same side. It's just a nice natural motion for me. And again, just having the palette knife perpendicular to the, not perpendicular, parallel to the canvas. And there we go. Doesn't that just look lovely? Especially when it starts to smush in there. Really, really nice. And you can experiment with having a bit less paint on the palette knife. And just starting with a very light pressure, so you're getting the white shapes, the white forms of clouds, and then pressing a little bit harder so you get that lovely soft look. I really, really like that, especially for a summer sky like the one that I'm doing here. And maybe if the palette knife drags in, then that informs the direction that you're taking. Sometimes you just got to go with what the hand and the tool does. Okay, and I want to just add a little bit more. Now you've just got to be a little bit careful when you're picking up the pure white with any kind of blue, because it's just going to start getting mixed in with the blue underneath very, very quickly. So you might need to just keep refreshing with pure white on your palette. So I'm just going to replenish this bright area over the top, and you see how it starts to collect. This is just where the palette knife just got a little bit stuck, and it's created an entire shape of the palette knife rather than just a few little bits. Again, it's very often, it's just a little bit of experimentation, allowing yourself to try some different techniques. Now, of course, with a palette knife with something like this, you can always dig in and create even softer blends like that in the background. So I'm just digging in with the front of the palette knife, taking all of the paint, and because of the little dots that were underneath, I'm starting to get a lovely sort of freckled effect. So let's try, in fact, just painting over all of this, pushing it into the canvas, seeing what happens there. So you see how, again, and I just can't help myself with that movement. But if you want to do it straight across, so that actually makes an amazing soft look, very, very hazy clouds. But even just trying out to make the nice dotty palette knife clouds first, and if you don't like it, you see, you can just do this. You can just press it in using, and if you start getting little drag lines, then alter the pressure that you're using with the palette knife, or you can always touch them up later. But that again just makes for a really, really nice hazy sky. But there are little areas of texture over on the right hand side which you can only get with the palette knife. It works really, really well. And the way that it's just starting to create little areas of dark coming through here, which again looks lovely. So that's now a very interesting hazy summer sky. And of course from here you can then add in any kind of cloud formation that you want to with a brush, and we're going to do that in a separate tutorial. But using the palette knife is just that very, very quick way to get nice little dotty clouds, either in the peach sky where you're adding in extra pinks, or here where you start off with the white and then maybe even just push it a little further and blend it all in to get something like that, which is going to be a beautiful backdrop to a landscape painting. Okay, so there's a few more little ideas for you. Have fun!